I never thought I'd be the kind of woman begging a bank manager to give me more time. But there I was, my hands shaking as I held the foreclosure notice. The paper felt like ice against my fingertips, and the words "final notice" seemed to burn into my retinas. My 8-year-old Emma was at school, and my 6-year-old Jake was at daycare, completely unaware that their mother was about to lose the only home they'd ever known. The irony wasn't lost on me 3 months earlier. I thought I had it all figured out. My ex-husband David had finally started paying child support regularly. My freelance graphic design work was picking up, and I'd even managed to save a small emergency fund. But life has a cruel sense of humor, doesn't it? One car accident, one hospital stay, one missed mortgage payment. And suddenly everything I'd built was crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. What I didn't know that morning, as I sat in my car outside First National Bank, was that the man who held my family's fate in his hands was watching me from his office window. Marcus Thompson, the branch manager everyone whispered about. The one who supposedly had a heart of stone when it came to foreclosures. But sometimes, the people we fear most are hiding the biggest secrets of all. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and walked toward those glass doors. Not knowing that this wasn't just about saving my house anymore. This was about discovering that sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's just making room for something beautiful to begin. But first, I had to fight the battle of my life. And Marcus Thompson, he was about to become either my salvation or my destruction. I just didn't know which yet. Walking into that bank felt like entering a lion's den. But I've learned that being a single mother means you do impossible things every single day. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is a story of how I almost lost everything, only to discover that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually the most beautiful beginning you never saw coming. 3 years ago, when David left us for his secretary Cliche, I promised my children that I would never let anyone take away their sense of security again. This house, on Maple Street, wasn't just for walls and a roof. It was Emma's art studio in the converted garage, Jake's treehouse that we built together with YouTube tutorials, and the kitchen where we had dance parties while making pancakes on Sunday mornings. It was home in every sense of the word, and I was about to fight for it with everything I had. But here's what I want you to understand before I tell you this story. This isn't just about foreclosure notices and bank managers and financial struggles. This is about the moment when you realize that the person you thought was your enemy might actually be the answer to prayers you didn't even know you were praying. This is about love finding you when you least expect it and most need it. Before we dive deeper into this journey, I'd love for you to be part of our community. Please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you believe in second chances and unexpected love stories. And I'm curious, drop a comment below and let me know what city and country you're watching from. I love connecting with people from all over the world who believe that sometimes our darkest moments lead us to our brightest days. Now, let me tell you about the day I met Marcus Thompson and how one foreclosure notice changed everything. The lobby of First National Bank smelled like leather chairs and broken dreams. I'd been inside this building dozens of times over the years, opening my first checking account when I was 80, getting pre-approved for my mortgage when David and I bought the house, even bringing the kids here to open their first savings accounts. But today, everything felt different. Today, I wasn't a customer. I was a supplicant, begging for mercy from people who dealt in numbers, not in the messy complications of real life. My appointment was at 2:30 p.m., and I was 20 minutes early because punctuality was one of the few things I could still control. I wore my best blazer, navy blue, purchased 4 job interviews that seemed like a lifetime ago, and I'd rehearsed my speech in the car. I would be professional, articulate, and confident. I would present my case like the capable woman I was, not like someone drowning in circumstances beyond her control. Sarah Mitchell. The voice came from behind me, and when I turned around, I forgot every word I'd planned to say. Marcus Thompson was not what I expected. The rumors around town painted him as some kind of corporate shark, a man in his 40s who'd moved here from Chicago and had been systematically cleaning house at the bank. I'd imagined someone cold, maybe balding, definitely wearing an expensive suit that screamed "I foreclose on families" before breakfast. Instead, I found myself looking at a man with kind eyes and graying temples, wearing a simple white shirt with his sleeves rolled up. He was tall, probably 6'2", with calloused hands that suggested he knew what real work looked like. When he smiled, and he did smile, despite the circumstances, I saw genuine warmth, not the practiced politeness I'd braced myself for. "Mr. Thompson," I managed, standing up so quickly that I nearly knocked over my purse. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." My voice sounded steadier than I felt, which was a small miracle. He gestured toward the hallway, and as we walked to his office, I caught a whiff of his cologne, something woodsy and understated that reminded me of Saturday mornings when life was simpler. His office surprised me, too. I'd expected intimidating mahogany furniture and diplomas covering every wall. Instead, there were plants everywhere, a fiddle-leaf fig by the window, succulents on his desk, even a small herb garden on the windowsill. The walls held photographs of landscapes, not corporate achievements, and there was a well-worn paperback novel tucked between his computer monitor and a coffee mug that read "World's Okayest Boss." "Please, sit down," he said, and his voice was gentler than I'd anticipated. "Can I get you some water? Coffee?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to hold anything without spilling it. My hands were still trembling slightly, and I clasped them together in my lap to hide it. He noticed, anyway. I could see it in the way his expressions softened even more. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, opening the file folder that contained what felt like my entire life reduced to numbers and dates. "I've reviewed your account, and I understand you're facing some challenges with your mortgage payments." The word challenges was such a gentle way to describe the financial catastrophe that had become my reality, and I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude for his tact. "Mr. Thompson," I said, and then my carefully rehearsed speech evaporated completely. Instead, the truth came tumbling out, raw, unfiltered, and desperately honest. "I know what the numbers say. I know I'm 3 months behind, and I know that technically you have every right to foreclose on my house. But that house isn't just an asset on a spreadsheet. It's where my children feel safe. It's where my daughter drew her first picture on the bedroom wall, and instead of getting angry, I framed it. It's where my son learned to ride his bike in the driveway. It's home, and I'm asking you to give me a chance to save it." Something shifted in his expression as I spoke. Something I couldn't quite identify, but that gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in months. Marcus Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that should have made me uncomfortable but somehow didn't. "Tell me about the accident?" he said quietly, and I realized he'd read beyond the numbers. He'd seen the story behind them, and for reasons I couldn't explain, that felt like everything. I wasn't prepared for kindness, so when Marcus asked about the accident with genuine concern in his voice, I almost started crying right there in his office. 3 months of holding everything together, of being strong for Emma and Jake, of pretending that everything would be okay. It all threatened to spill out in that moment. I took a shaky breath and began to tell him what I hadn't told anyone else, not even my sister who lived 2 states away and called every Sunday to check on us. "It was a Tuesday morning in March," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was driving to meet a client about a logo design, my biggest potential contract in months. The rain had just started, and I remember thinking I should have left earlier because I hate being late. I paused, remembering how excited I'd been that morning, how certain I was that this client would solve all our financial problems. The other driver ran the red light. I never saw him coming." Marcus listened without interrupting, his hands folded on his desk, his attention completely focused on me. There was something about the way he listened, not like someone waiting for his turn to speak, but like someone who understood that sometimes people need to be heard before they can be helped. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. I continued, broken ribs, a concussion, internal bleeding. Jake was so scared when he saw me with all those tubes and bandages. Emma tried to be brave, but she was only 8. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that mommy might not come home? Who took care of your children while you were hospitalized?" he asked, and I could hear something personal in his question, as if he knew what it was like to worry about children in crisis. "My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She's 74 and has arthritis, but she moved into our house and took care of them like they were her own grandchildren. I'll never be able to repay her for that kindness. I smiled despite myself, thinking of how Mrs. Rodriguez had taught Jake to make her famous sopapillas while I was recovering. The medical bills weren't covered by your insurance, Marcus asked, though he was already looking at documents in my file that probably answered his question. I had the basic plan, the cheapest one I could find. It covered about 60% of the hospital stay. Nothing for the ambulance, nothing for the physical therapy I needed to get back to work. And while I was lying in that hospital bed, I couldn't work. No work meant no income, and freelance graphic design isn't exactly a job with paid sick leave. I watched his face as I explained how the bills had piled up like snow in a blizzard, overwhelming and impossible to clear fast enough. I tried to call the bank when I realized I was going to miss the March payment, I said. I spoke to someone who told me that one missed payment wouldn't trigger foreclosure proceedings, that I just needed to catch up as soon as possible. The bitterness crept into my voice despite my efforts to stay professional. What they didn't tell me was that missing one payment would make it exponentially harder to catch up on the next ones. Marcus looked uncomfortable, and I realized he was probably thinking about all the other families who'd sat in this chair, telling similar stories to previous bank managers who hadn't listened with the same attention he was giving me. I'm sorry that happened, he said, and I believed he meant it. The previous management here had different policies about customer communication. We're working to change that. Something in his voice made me look at him more closely. You're not from here originally, are you? I asked, though I knew the answer from the local gossip network that operated with military efficiency in our small town. Chicago, he confirmed. I moved here 8 months ago when the bank brought me in to restructure operations. It's quite a change from the city. There was a story there. I could sense it, but it wasn't my place to ask. Can I ask you something, Mrs. Mitchell? He said, leaning forward slightly. If we could work out a payment plan, something manageable that would allow you to keep your house, would you be interested in exploring that option? My heart stopped beating for a moment, or at least it felt like it did. Are you serious? I whispered, afraid that if I spoke too loudly, I might wake up from what felt like an impossible dream. I'm very serious, Marcus said, and for the first time in 3 months, I felt like I could breathe again. But I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy, and it's not a guaranteed solution. We'll need to restructure your entire loan, and you'll need to prove that you can meet the new payment schedule. Are you willing to fight for your house, Mrs. Mitchell? I looked into his eyes and saw something I hadn't expected to find in a bank manager's office. Hope. Mr. Thompson, I said, my voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. I've been fighting for my house since the day I brought my babies home to it. The question is, are you willing to help me win? Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and I worked together in a way I never expected to work with a bank manager. He didn't just shuffle papers and calculate numbers. He actually listened to my ideas and helped me create a realistic financial plan. We met 3 times in his office, and each time I discovered something new about him that contradicted everything I'd heard about the heartless corporate executive who'd come to clean house at our small-town bank. During our second meeting, I noticed he kept a small framed photograph on his bookshelf. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, grinning at the camera while holding a baseball glove. When he caught me looking at it, his expression grew soft and distant. That's my son, David, he said quietly. He would have been 12 this year. The past tense hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I understood something about Marcus Thompson that the town gossips had never guessed. I'm so sorry, I whispered, and he nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. Leukemia. We fought it for 2 years before ... Double quotes he trailed off, looking out his office window at the elementary school across the street. That's actually why I left Chicago. Too many memories. When this position opened up, starting fresh in a small town seemed like the right thing to do. The pieces were falling into place. His gentleness with my situation, his understanding of what it meant to worry about children, his willingness to see beyond numbers to the human story underneath. Is that why you're helping me? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. If his kindness was just displaced grief, would it last long enough to save my house? Marcus looked at me directly, his green eyes serious. Partly, he admitted, but not in the way you think. I'm helping you because you remind me that there are still things worth fighting for, still families worth protecting. David always said I should use my position to help people, not just make money for shareholders. Our third meeting changed everything. I'd brought my laptop to show Marcus the new client contracts. I'd secured 3 small businesses and a nonprofit organization that needed branding work. My income was finally stabilizing, and I was excited to prove that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. But when I walked into his office, I could tell something was wrong. His usual warm greeting was replaced by a tense nod, and there were other people in the room. A woman in a severe gray suit and an older man with silver hair who looked like he'd stepped out of a Wall Street boardroom. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus said formally, his voice completely different from the gentle tone I'd grown accustomed to. "I'd like you to meet Patricia Hawthorne, our regional director, and Robert Sterling from our corporate office." My stomach dropped. I'd seen enough movies to know that when corporate executives showed up unannounced, it wasn't to deliver good news. Miss Hawthorne looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe, and Mr. Sterling didn't look at me at all. "Ms. Mitchell," Patricia said, not bothering with the courtesy of using my married title, "we've reviewed your case, and we're afraid Mr. Thompson may have given you false hope about restructuring your loan. While we appreciate his enthusiasm for customer service, the bank's position is that foreclosure proceedings should move forward as scheduled." The words hit me like a slap, and I felt 3 weeks of hope crumbling into dust. I looked at Marcus, desperate for him to say something, to fight for the plan we'd worked so hard to create, but his face was a mask of professional composure, and when our eyes met, I saw something that looked like defeat. "I understand there may have been some miscommunication about our policies," he said carefully, and each word felt like a betrayal. Was this all just an elaborate game? Had I been naive to trust him? However, Marcus continued, and something shifted in his posture. "I believe Mrs. Mitchell deserves the opportunity to present her restructured payment plan to the full board. She's secured new income streams and has demonstrated a commitment to meeting her obligations." Patricia's eyes narrowed, and Mr. Sterling finally looked up from his phone with obvious irritation. "Mr. Thompson," I hardly think he began, but Marcus interrupted him. "The board meets next Friday," Marcus said, looking directly at me instead of his supervisors. "Mrs. Mitchell, if you're willing to present your case to them, I'll make sure you get a fair hearing." It wasn't the solution we'd planned, but it was a chance. Miss Hawthorne looked furious, Mr. Sterling looked bored, and Marcus looked like a man who'd just declared war on his own employer. As I left the bank that day, I realized that saving my house had become about more than just keeping a roof over my children's heads. Somehow, it had become about proving that Marcus Thompson's faith in people wasn't misplaced. The question was, would his job survive long enough for us to find out? The week leading up to the board meeting was the longest 7 days of my life. I spent every spare moment preparing my presentation, printing charts and graphs, practicing my speech until Emma complained that I was talking to myself more than I was talking to her and Jake. Underneath my preparation was a gnawing worry about Marcus. Something had changed after that meeting with the corporate expert, and I wasn't sure if he was still fighting for me or just going through the motions to appease his bosses. 2 days before the board meeting, Marcus called me at home, something he'd never done before. "Sarah," he said, and his use of my first name sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at Miller's Cafe tonight after 8? The kids can come too. I know you don't have a babysitter." The fact that he remembered my childcare limitations touched me more than it should have, and I found myself wondering when Marcus Thompson had become more than just my bank manager. Miller's Cafe was nearly empty when I arrived with Emma and Jake. Marcus was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 hot chocolates waiting for the kids and a coffee for me. He looked tired, older somehow, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. Emma and Jake immediately gravitated toward the hot chocolate, chattering excitedly about their day at school while I slid into the booth across from Marcus. "I need to tell you something," he said without preamble, his voice low enough that the kids couldn't hear from their seats at the counter. "Patricia Hawthorne didn't come here just to review your case. She came because someone complained about my handling of foreclosure procedures, specifically yours. There's going to be an investigation into whether I've been too lenient with struggling homeowners. My blood ran cold. I'd brought trouble into his life by asking for help. Marcus, I'm so sorry, I whispered, but he shook his head quickly. Don't apologize. You did nothing wrong, but I need you to understand what's really happening here. This isn't just about your house anymore. It's about whether banks like ours are going to treat people like human beings or just numbers on a balance sheet. Your case has become a symbol, Sarah, and there are people who want to make sure you fail. The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Are you going to lose your job because of me? I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. Marcus reached across the table and covered my hand with his, a gesture so unexpected and warm that I felt my cheeks flush. Maybe, he said honestly, but some things are more important than job security. My son taught me that before he died. He told me then about David's last weeks, how his 10-year-old boy had made Marcus promise to help people who need help, even when it's hard. It was a promise Marcus had forgotten in the years of grief and corporate climbing that followed his son's death. But meeting me had reminded him of the man David had wanted his father to be. You brought something back to life in me, Sarah, he said, his thumb gently stroking my knuckles. Something I thought I'd lost forever. Mom, is Mr. Marcus your boyfriend? Jake's voice cut through the intimate moment like a foghorn, and both Marcus and I jerked our hands apart as if we'd been caught doing something scandalous. Emma giggled from her perch at the counter, and I felt my face turn approximately the same color as the cafe's red vinyl seats. Jake, I hissed, but Marcus was laughing, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his entire face. Not yet, buddy, Marcus said with a wink at Jake, and my heart did something acrobatic in my chest. But I'm working on it. The casualness of his admission, delivered with hot chocolate mustaches as witnesses, should have been awkward. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Emma clapped her hands together and announced that she thought Marcus was much nicer than Daddy, which was both heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Marcus pulled me aside one more time. Sarah, no matter what happens at the board meeting on Friday, I want you to know something. Meeting you and your children has reminded me what it feels like to want to build a life with someone again. Your house brought us together, but it's not going to be what keeps us together. Do you understand what I'm saying? I looked into his eyes and saw a future I'd stopped believing in, a possibility of love that had nothing to do with mortgages and everything to do with finding someone who saw me as more than just a single mother struggling to get by. I understand, I whispered, and when he kissed my cheek softly, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay regardless of what the bank board decided. Friday morning arrived with a kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I dropped Emma and Jake at school, kissed them both twice for good luck, and drove to the bank with my presentation materials and a heart full of determination. Whatever happened in that boardroom, I was going to fight with everything I had, not just for my house, but for the future Marcus and I were beginning to imagine together. The boardroom at First National was intimidating in a way Marcus's office had never been. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs that seemed designed to make people feel small. Patricia Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, like a queen holding court, with 5 other board members arranged along the sides. Marcus sat at the far end, and when our eyes met, he gave me the smallest encouraging nod. I presented my case with every ounce of professionalism I could muster. I showed them my new client contracts, my projected income for the next 12 months, and the detailed payment plan Marcus and I had developed. I talked about my children, about what home meant to our family, about the community connections that made our small town strong. When I finished, the room was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the wall. Patricia Hawthorne was the first to speak, and her voice was as cold as I'd expected. Ms. Mitchell, while we appreciate your passion, the bank cannot continue to make exceptions for every customer who faces financial difficulties. The precedent would be financially irresponsible. Other board members nodded, and I felt my hopes beginning to crumble. This had been a foregone conclusion, hadn't it? They'd brought me here just to make it look like they'd given me a fair chance. But then Marcus stood up, and something in his posture commanded attention. If I may, he said formally. I'd like to add some information that might be relevant to the board's decision. Patricia's eyes narrowed, but she gestured for him to continue. What Marcus did next was either the bravest or most foolish thing I'd ever witnessed. He presented a detailed analysis of every foreclosure the bank had processed in the past 2 years. What you'll see, Marcus said, clicking through slides on his laptop, is that in cases where we worked with homeowners to restructure their loans, we recovered 93% of the original loan value. In cases where we proceeded directly to foreclosure, that recovery rate dropped to 67%. Mrs. Mitchell's case isn't just about compassion, it's about smart business practices that benefit both the bank and the community we serve. The numbers were undeniable, and I watched the board members' expressions change as Marcus walked them through case after case where foreclosure had been more costly than restructuring. Furthermore, Marcus continued, and his voice grew stronger with each word. Mrs. Mitchell has demonstrated exactly the kind of resilience and commitment we should want in our customers. She's not asking for charity, she's asking for a partnership that will benefit both parties for years to come. The vote, when it came, was closer than I'd dared to hope. 4 in favor of foreclosure, 3 in favor of restructuring. My heart sank until I realized that Patricia Hawthorne hadn't voted yet. She sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, studying the papers in front of her. Finally, she looked up at Marcus, then at me. Mr. Thompson, she said slowly, your analysis is ... compelling. Against my better judgment, I'm willing to approve a 6-month trial restructuring. If Mrs. Mitchell meets every payment on schedule, we'll make the arrangement permanent. I burst into tears right there in the boardroom, not caring how unprofessional it looked. Marcus was grinning like he'd won the lottery, and even Patricia Hawthorne looked slightly pleased with herself. As the board members filed out, Marcus approached me with official paperwork in his hands and an expression of pure joy on his face. Congratulations, Sarah, he said formally, then dropped his voice to a whisper. We did it. We actually did it. 6 months later, I was making my final payment under the restructured plan when Marcus proposed to me in that same boardroom where I'd fought to save my house. He said it was only fitting, since that room was where our real future together had begun. Emma and Jake were there as witnesses, along with Mrs. Rodriguez and half the bank staff who'd been secretly rooting for us all along. When I said yes, Patricia Hawthorne, who had become an unexpected ally and friend, actually applauded. The house on Maple Street wasn't just saved, it had become the foundation for a love story I never saw coming. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings grow from the scariest endings, and sometimes the person you think is going to foreclose on your dreams is actually the one who's going to make them all come true. Looking back now, 3 years later, I realized that the day I walked into First National Bank wasn't just about saving my house, it was about discovering that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people, at the most impossible times. Marcus and I were married 80 months after that board meeting, with Emma as my maid of honor and Jake as his best man. We still live in the house on Maple Street, but now it's filled with the kind of laughter that comes from a family that chose each other. Marcus adopted Emma and Jake last year, and watching him teach Jake to throw a baseball in our backyard while Emma shows him her latest art projects reminds me every day that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst fears. The bank? It's thriving under Marcus's leadership, with a reputation for working with families instead of against them. And me, I learned that being a single mother taught me everything I needed to know about fighting for what matters. But it took falling in love with a bank manager to teach me that, sometimes, the best battles are the ones you don't have to fight alone. Sometimes, home isn't just the house you're trying to save, it's the person who helps you save it.